Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, lots of big DVOA movers and shakers this week. First thing that jumped out to me that you pointed out in your DVOA column, sort of mind the gap between the top three teams and the rest of the NFL. What do you make of what's going on there?
Yeah, and the gap has a little bit of an asterisk because one of the teams that's at the top is Chicago, and they've only played 4 games, and one of those games was a big blowout. But I think it does demonstrate the extent to which the Rams and the Chiefs in particular are way ahead of the rest of the NFL right now. I mean, yes, there are a couple of 4-1 teams, but the 4-1 teams, in particular Cincinnati, have not played as well as the undefeated team. I think the Rams and the Chiefs are just way ahead of everybody. And then you've got the Bears with their outstanding defense. And then you've got everybody else with the Saints and the Chargers taking big leaps forward this week to make up our top 5.
Yeah, in that top 3 there, the Bears are the more surprising team to me. Obviously, some outstanding games, and the only blemish being that Week 1 loss to the Packers, which I think at the time we didn't think that was going to be their only blemish through 5 weeks of the season. One thing that we talked about a month ago before we were getting started was how much separation we thought there was between the NFC and the AFC. And I certainly look at those teams, and I see the Rams as being good evidence for the NFC, but the Chiefs have been right there as the second best team in the NFL. They're an AFC team. You get 3 of your top 5 are NFC teams, with the Saints and the Chargers rounding out the top 5 there. What do you make of what DVOA can tell us about kind of the split between conferences right now? Is that really as stark a divide as we expected?
It's nowhere near as stark a divide as we expected. If you look actually the top 11, 3 of the top 4 teams are NFC, but then every team from 5 to 11 is an AFC team. And teams 15, 16, 17, and 18 are AFC teams. So right now we have the AFC pretty much rated far ahead of the NFC, except for the top couple of NFC teams. There have just been, I think, many more underwhelming, underperforming teams in the NFC. Minnesota, far below what we expected. Philadelphia, far below what we expected. Atlanta, Dallas, far below at least what Football Outsiders expected. I know everybody else was pretty down on Dallas, but we thought there was going to be a rebound there. There hasn't been. So overall, this season, the NFC is really underperforming compared to our expectations, and the AFC is overperforming.
Really interesting stuff there. All right, well, let's move right ahead, and let's take a look back at the big games that we looked at last week. The first one we looked at, the Dolphins and the Bengals, both came in at 3-1. At halftime, it looked like the Dolphins would emerge from the game at 4-1, but it was definitely a tale of two halves there. And I know you've been obsessed with this, and I'm a little bit obsessed with it too. How are the Dolphins still so highly rated by DVOA?
I know. If you look at their full numbers for the season, it doesn't seem to make sense. And then when you look at every individual game, it makes a lot more sense, each game individually. Like take this game, for example. Cincinnati had more yards per play, but Minnesota had a higher success rate. So those things end up canceling each other out. So then, not Minnesota, Miami. But Miami then ends up with a higher rating for the game despite losing because they had a higher special teams rating.
Right. Just fascinating there. Obviously, Jakeem Grant, super difference maker on that one play. They've really cracked the code, and they're trying. It seems to me more like they beat the system rather than, in this case, DVOA trying to really tell us something that we can't see.
Yeah, I realize it might not be correct for me to, publicly express questions about my own system like this, but I think something is wrong here, and it's very hard to go in and figure out what it is. And it's hard to change things in the middle of the season because, you don't change a system like this for one team out of 32 years worth of data. That being said, it's missing something here. Miami's been outscored by its opponents. It should not be this far ahead. That being said, there are a few things about Miami that are interesting. They're 6th in the league in success rate allowed on defense. So that defense has been a lot better than anyone would have expected. And they've only recovered 22% of fumbles, which is the worst figure in the league. So one of the things that DVOA is picking up is that Miami has been very unlucky on fumbles turnover rates.
Right, and just like that in this past game, like you mentioned, they have 2 turnovers returned for touchdowns. that's not going to happen. That 100% of the time that you have a turnover, that it's going to be returned for a touchdown. I'm not sure actually if that was 100% of their turnovers in the game.
No, but it was two big ones, obviously.
You don't have two in a season so much as two in a game very often. So these are really big plays that you can't account for in a type of statistic like DVOA, where you're going to be looking at these individual events and trying to look forward predictively because they have an outsized influence depending on how predictive they are. So I don't think you're flawed in being honest in saying that they've kind of cracked the code in a way with what they're playing. And I think you're dead on too when you talk about the defense. The defense was excellent. The Bengals end up scoring 27 points, but like we said, 14 of those are directly related to scores that came when the Miami offense was on the field. And then if you look at the special teams performance, the Dolphins certainly outperformed. But then when Miami had the ball, anytime you get into this, the offense is just really struggling right now. Kind of bizarre play calling at times. Kenyon Drake has had some nice moments, and so have their speed guys. But once Tunsil went down, I know that was kind of an excuse, in my opinion, to say, we lost the left tackle and then the game fell apart, as Adam Gase did. But at the same time, that's clearly what happened.
Yeah, I think going back over the whole season, for me, it's the first two games. Why we have Miami's offense around average in weeks 1 and 2 against Tennessee and the Jets, when it really looks like they played worse than average, is where the question mark came in. But, I mean, their offense was spectacular against the Raiders in week 3. And then it was horrible against the Patriots in week 4. And we have it negative against the Bengals, right? I mean, we know that their offense is a problem. So it's just weird because Miami has also done it. They've done it differently in every game. The first 2 games were about defense. The third game was about offense. This fifth one was about special teams. The fourth one was just terrible all around, and DVOA did pick that up. But I can't. It's really hard to get into the nitty gritty of every single play and figure out where we're missing something. But we're missing something.
All right. We won't belabor that point any longer, as fascinated as we both are by nerding out about it. Next game we talked about last week, the Redskins at the Saints, and the Washington secondary that we talked about absolutely did not show up. It was the Drew Brees show. Should have expected it on national television at the Superdome. What did you think of that one?
Yeah, blown coverages. Apparently on the Traquan Smith touchdown that set the all-time yardage record, it was everybody was playing cover 3 except Josh Norman was playing cover 2. I mean, they just made all kinds of mistakes.
Is that what they said after the game? Was that a media report?
No, somebody who had one of the people who works for Next Gen Stats for the NFL had one of those diagrams where they show the players moving around.
And he and the safety on that side both sat down in the flat for sure. Yeah, it could have been that he thought it was cover 3 where he had flat responsibility and the safety was playing behind him. That's what I initially thought, but certainly, yeah, if he thought they were in cover 2, that would make sense as well. What I will say though is, if he thought they were in cover 2, he allowed an awfully clean release for that receiver to go right outside of him. You're supposed to funnel that guy inside of you if you're thinking cover 2. So it would be more of a legitimate excuse if he got confused about the sky cloud call to me than if he said it was cover 2, just because of how cleanly he allowed that release to get outside of him down into the turkey hole.
Interesting. He definitely he definitely appears to be the guy who screwed it up on that play.
Absolutely. It looks like yeah.
And Alex Smith also had his worst game of the season. So it was an all-around failure by Washington. They failed on both offense and defense. There's no one player can be blamed for this debacle.
Okay, we're not going to spend too much time talking about the NFC today, so I want to ask you about New Orleans and how you think they figure into the playoff picture. Are they the best team there outside of the Rams, and where do they fit in? Who else is hanging with them?
I mean, right now, I think that they are the most likely team to make the playoffs, certainly outside of the Rams, and our playoff odds have them that way. They're 4-1, and in DVOA, they're the third highest team in the conference. Carolina has been a little bit more perky than I think I expected, although they certainly got away with a close one this week, needing a 63-yard field goal to beat the Giants. But with Tampa Bay being, not really very good and Atlanta being way down, we'll talk about that in a second, New Orleans really has control over their division, on top of the fact that they look to be the best bet for the number 2 seed in the NFC. I guess they'll be competing with Chicago. Chicago has such an easy schedule. Chicago has the easiest schedule in the league coming up. So maybe New Orleans is going to fall into the 3, but they're looking like a dangerous team.
Could be very interesting there. Interesting how that race could shape up between those two one-loss teams, and then the Panthers also at 3-1 right there. One thing I know with the Panthers that I think maybe why they've been a little more frisky than we expected, just 104 points scored this year and 91 points against. That's plus 13. Usually doesn't give you a 3-1 record. That's usually going to be a lot closer to a 2-2 record with that kind of a point distribution. So maybe Pythagoras tells us that the Panthers will come back down to where we expect, but I do think they could compete with the Saints in that division. We've seen stranger things.
Yeah, I mean, again, 63-yard field goal. They're a 63-yard field goal away from being 2-2, so that's about as close as you can come.
Right, that explains the difference.
At least New Orleans, like the Rams, has lived up to expectations. We talked about NFC teams not living up to expectations, and that brings us to the next game we had in our most important games of the week, which was Minnesota at Philadelphia, two teams that have significantly not living up to expectations this year.
Yeah, and my big question for you, would you have given the ball to your running back with the torn ACL, knowing that he was going to complain about it after the game if you didn't?
I don't know how much trainers know the AC, did they know he had a torn ACL, but it's not like they don't have other running backs on the roster. Smallwood had a couple of carries, and there's I can't remember who else was healthy for this game. They've had a lot of running back injuries in Philadelphia, but you can find running backs. I think if a guy says he's not going to be 100%, you try to find a guy who's 100% because you don't put guys out there who are going to fail. You don't put them in positions to fail.
Yeah, sort of a funny thing with ACL injuries is that they can kind of actually slip under the radar sometimes. Like we all know them to be obvious season enders, in so many cases. And then sometimes you'll hear about guys who actually played with a torn ACL from time to time. This is one of those bizarre cases. What I can tell you is I don't think Miami would be surprised to hear that Jay Ajayi had a knee injury this year. There were whispers when he made the trade last year that was related to a degenerative knees and the expectation that there were going to be issues in the future. So something kind of not to sleep on there. Another one that I think is interesting is Darren Sproles and his impact on this team. I think that Philadelphia really plays well out of 11 personnel. They both run and pass really efficiently out of that personnel grouping. I think a lot of that relates to Darren Sproles and what he brings to their offense. So his return will be important, in my opinion.
Their underperformance this year is in a lot of ways, on offense at least, related to the things that we thought were going to regress to the mean, right? Last year, Philadelphia was historically good on third down, historically good passing in the red zone. This year, Philadelphia, 21st on third down, 19th passing in the red zone. So, I mean, that's more regression than I would have expected. That's regression past the mean, but those are problems for them this year.
Yeah, always tough when you're coming from the throne and people are giving you their best shot every week. Okay, let's talk about our last chance game from last week real quick. It was Atlanta and Pittsburgh, and is Atlanta done?
Atlanta is done. I mean, they're pretty close to done. It's very difficult to come back from 1-4, and it's not like they've outperformed their 1-4 record. They're like 27th in DVOA, which is the kind of thing that usually goes with a 1-4 record. And this was their worst game of the year by DVOA. So it's not like they're getting better right now than they were early in the season.
One thing that I noticed in this game is that a blocked punt in the third quarter really is what helped extend the lead. Went from a 10-point game to a 17-point game at that point. We've talked about how Atlanta's had so many injuries on defense. And sometimes when you have a lot of injuries on defense, what you end up doing is depleting your special teams because you have to bring the special teamers up onto defense, and then you end up filling the bottom of your roster with guys off the street who sometimes don't know their responsibilities, who sometimes haven't been with you for all training camp, where they're just not as good players. And I think that was one of those effects that we saw there, kind of the crack in the dam led to that blocked punt, which ultimately helped really seal the deal in this one.
Yeah, and the Atlanta passing game has been what we expected. The Atlanta passing game is 6th in DVOA. They've got no running game this year, and running game has really faltered. And part of that may be the Freeman injury, but part of that is the offensive line. And then the defense is just riddled by injuries and ranks 31st.
Well, I love all of our analytics friends, but if people want to tell me that running doesn't count or defense doesn't count, I would tell them to watch Atlanta.
Yeah, well, those things count. I think running backs don't matter is a different idea than running doesn't matter. It still matter. You don't want to be terrible at. It's just better to be good passing than to be good running, but it doesn't mean you don't want to be good running.
Right. It doesn't not matter. We're on the same page with that one. We should really talk to somebody who disagrees with us more about this, because I think it would be fun to maybe have that argument. Talk to me about Pittsburgh, though. Pittsburgh all the way up to number 10 in DVOA. They're 2-2-1, same record as the Browns. What do we make of this team?
I think, again, only 5 weeks into the season, what we knew about teams going into the season still applies, and what we knew about Pittsburgh still applies. They have the best offensive line continuity. They were missing a couple of their offensive linemen early. Those guys have gotten healthy. Antonio Brown is going to come out of his shell at some point. Juju Smith-Schuster is super talented. We know they've got a good quarterback. The defense was a top 10 defense last year, so it should be better than it was in the early weeks. I mean, yes, they still miss Shazier in the middle of that defense, but they should be better than they were early on, and they have been better than they were early on, and they're now 16th.
So some interesting research just on the point with Pittsburgh of what they've been, especially offensively. James Conner as a running back replacing Le'Veon Bell, how much of a difference has that made? Conner, through this point of the year, is 5th in total receiving expected points added. So on plays where he's targeted, he's 5th in total expected points added as a receiver. In 2017, Le'Veon Bell ranked 5th in total receiving expected points added over the course of the season. So they've been neck and neck identical in terms of their receiving ability to impact the game offensively. Now, what's been different? 11% of Conner's targets come from the slot or out wide, as opposed to Bell, who had nearly double the rate at 21% last year. As noted by our scout Bryce Rossler, the Steelers are almost certainly missing the ability to motion Bell, which helps tips off the opposing coverage schemes. You send out the running back out into the wide receiver spot, you can get the man zone tip off really quickly, usually based on whether or not they send a linebacker out with him or if they leave a corner matched up on him, how they match up there. So Le'Veon Bell does so much to dictate not just defensive personnel, but also the alignments and tips off the coverages. And I think that it's been that's really had the effect, as you mentioned before, on Antonio Brown. From an expected points added per play perspective, he's one of 12 receivers with a negative expected points added per target this year. He's only one of 12 receivers in the NFL that with enough targets that have a negative expected points added. To put that in perspective, Juju Smith-Schuster is 46th. He adds 22 expected points per 100 plays. AJ Green is 12th. He adds 48 per 100 plays. So we're used to seeing a lot higher numbers. Those are the sorts of numbers that Brown was putting up last year. This year, way down to the point where he's negative. And my opinion is that I think that this is an ability to focus on Antonio Brown with Le'Veon gone and the amount of attention that's being given to him. And also, I think it's having an impact on Big Ben in terms of not having Bell to tip off the coverages, to dictate personnel. And I think all of this together says, so if we look at the old school kind of statistics, if we just look at the fantasy production, yes, James Conner hasn't had an effect on the Steelers. Looking a little bit deeper into things, maybe there was an adjustment period, but I think this has really been a different offense without Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, definitely. And Brown, I will say DVOA, DYAR stats totally agree. Brown has yet to have a game this year with positive receiving DVOA, which is really shocking given what he had done in the past. So we'll see. The rumor is that Bell is going to come back during their bye week next week and will be back for week 8. So we'll have to see how much, if he comes back, does that change their offense?
Yes, the AFC North race is definitely shaping up to be one of the most interesting races with really all 4 of those teams still in the mix. All right, let's take a quick break, and I will do a quick read for one of our sponsors. The Off the Charts Football Podcast is brought to you by the Sports Info Solutions Data Hub, located at SISDataHub.com. The SIS Data Hub is an interactive tool that allows you to tap into the vast Sports Info Solutions database to find answers to almost any question imaginable. Want to know which quarterback performs the strongest in 11 personnel against man coverage while under pressure in the fourth quarter of a one-possession game? Answers are just a few clicks away at SISDataHub.com. The SIS Data Hub is also the only place to view exclusive proprietary statistics like points added, positive play percentage, and independent quarterback rating. By combining this with the ability for the user to add an unlimited number of filters based on SIS charting data, the Data Hub is a trusted tool for coaches, scouts, and the media, and it could be yours too. Right now, for a limited time, you can get a free 1-week trial to this revolutionary database when you go to sisdatahub.com and register for an account. That's sisdatahub.com. Okay, coming right back in. Our first biggest game of the week pits two of those aforementioned AFC North rivals. Aaron, who do we have?
Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. Cincinnati, by our playoff odds, is in 72% with a win, 43% with a loss. Pittsburgh is in 49% with a win, 22% with a loss, making this the most important game for making the playoffs this week.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about Andy Dalton's season and how he's been a little bit better this year, and some of that receiver play has really improved along with the offensive line in front of him. But we broke this out a little bit differently, and it almost looks like he's been playing suspiciously well this year. So in terms of expected points added per attempt, 2016, you see 5 expected points added per 100 passes. 2017, 8 expected points added per 100 passes. 2018, he's up to 19. Positive play percentage, similar trend. 47% in 2016, 41% in 2017, up to 52% this year. IQR, again, 96, 93, and now he's up to 106 this year. Andy Dalton is having a suspiciously good season, an un-Andy Dalton-like season, even better from where he was before his offensive line got pulled out from under him. I'm very curious to see how he plays out in this game against the maligned Steelers secondary.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dalton did put up numbers like this in the past. They just were in 2015. I mean, and it's interesting that his expected points added was not that high in 2016 because DVOA still had him 12th. It wasn't until 2017 that his offensive numbers, by our metrics, really collapsed. Net yards per pass also, he had the career high 7.6 in 2015. Then in 2016, it looked a lot like the numbers that he had in the previous parts of his career. And then in 2017, it collapsed. So now it's back up, but it's back up to where it was in 2015. Another thing I'll say about this game is I went and looked at some of the splits, and it's interesting third downs because that would look to be Pittsburgh's advantage in this game. Cincinnati's offense is 25th on third downs, while Pittsburgh's defense is 27th. So that sort of evenly matched. But Pittsburgh's offense is 6th on third downs, while Cincinnati's defense is 28th. And that's interesting because the Pittsburgh offense is 26th on third and long. So it's getting into third and short and third and medium that's the secret of the Pittsburgh offense. So if Cincinnati can stop Connor on first down or stop the passes on first down, then they can hopefully put Pittsburgh in third and long and get the ball back. But if Pittsburgh is consistently getting into third and medium, they should be able to convert, at a higher than average percent of the time.
So one thing that's going to have a big impact on whether or not the Steelers can get into those reasonable situations is the play of that Bengals secondary. And what we've seen between William Jackson and Dre Kirkpatrick from last season to this season is also really interesting. Last year, we saw two guys who Kirkpatrick was giving up yard per coverage snap, 50% completion rate, whereas Jackson's only given up a third of a yard per snap and a 24% completion rate. All of a sudden this year, they're neck and neck with each other. Both of them giving up 0.7 of a yard per coverage snap. Kirkpatrick's completions rate dropped down into the 30s, and Jackson's up into the 50s. So we're starting to see a little bit more of these guys coming down to earth and then also improving back to the mean. Again, regression to the mean. Both these guys now performing about equal to one another, whereas last year we saw a real difference from one side to the other.
Yeah, it's interesting because cornerback stats, but first of all, anecdotally, cornerback performance tends to really be, I think, more inconsistent than people realize, because I don't think people realize how often they just talk about cornerbacks like, oh, that guy used to be really good. What happened to him? This, remember, used to happen to Antonio Cromartie all the time. He would go from good to bad to good to bad. And the stats back that up. The cornerback coverage stats are really inconsistent compared to the stats at some other positions.
So Antonio Cromartie, in seasons when he had an odd number of children, actually much outperformed the even number. No, we don't have that stat here.
The other thing I'd say about Cincinnati, 26th in DVOA against running backs in the passing game. So we were talking there about James Conner and how he's got expected points added in receiving that are similar to Le'Veon Bell's. And this is a good defense to be passing to James Conner against. On the other hand, it's not a great defense to be passing to Giovanni Bernard because Pittsburgh is number 2 in DVOA against running backs in the passing game.
Right, and also on that side of the ball, going back to talking about Bill Lazor's offense, and I think when we look at the mystery of Andy Dalton, I think we should really look no further than Bill Lazor and what he's been able to do. But the matchup of the game for me, the Bengals' offensive line against the Steelers' ability to put pressure on the quarterback. The Steelers lead the league in pressures with 85. TJ Watt has 18. And Andy Dalton's IQR drops 23 points when under pressure. So he's up at 113 from a clean pocket and down at 90 under pressure. So Dalton takes a hard hit, especially in terms of interception rate. He's 4 times more likely to throw an interception when he's under pressure. And that really accounts for that difference in the IQR there. Interesting side note from the intern extraordinaire Patrick Rowley. Josh Allen is the player with the sharpest drop in IQR between the clean pocket and under pressure. His clean pocket IQR is 87, and his under pressure IQR is 1.7. And Patrick also wanted us to note that he did not make that up.
That's like one of those SAT jokes where you talk about how you could get a higher score just by signing your name.
Right. That's a little bit how both quarterback rating and IQR work. Just throw it into the ground and you get the 39. All right, let's move forward. Let's take a look at one game involving another 2 AFC teams. What's our second most important game of the week for playoff odds?
Sticking partially in the AFC North, the second most important game is Baltimore, Tennessee. Baltimore 69% with a win, 42% with a loss. Tennessee is in the playoffs 48% of the time with a win, 24% of the time with a loss.
This is a game that features 2 excellent pass defenses. Just the raw numbers, the Titans are allowing 225 yards through the air per game. That's second in the NFL. The Ravens at 234. That's fourth in the NFL. Also, the Ravens leading the league with just 3.3 yards per attempt allowed rushing. And when we look at the Ravens' pass defense, which I think is where it all starts for them, we look at the corners. And the Ravens actually have 3 of the top 5 corners in the NFL in terms of positive play percentage when targeted. Tavon Young, Marlon Humphrey, and Brandon Carr are all really having excellent seasons, and that's where I think the success on defense starts for them.
And they now get Jimmy Smith back, who is probably the best of all 4 of those corners.
I agree with you 100%. It starts to get a little scary what you think they can do in terms of just stifling other teams' offenses.
I will say that while their conventional stats are similar, by the advanced stats, Baltimore is definitely the better pass defense. We have Baltimore 4th in pass defense and Tennessee 13th.
And then, of course, we got to go to the other side of the ball and look at the quarterbacks. Mariota, of non-rookie, non-backup quarterbacks, Mariota has the second worst expected points added per attempt. He's at negative 14 expected points added per 100 attempts. Of non-rookie, non-backup quarterbacks, Dak Prescott is the only quarterback having a worse season so far. Now, little bit of good news here. The Titans, of course, are 3-2, and Mariota is still much better than Blaine Gabbert, who is pacing the NFL in terms of poorest expected points added per play.
One interesting split between these teams when I was looking at the various splits, Baltimore is the number 2 defense in the league against shotgun formations, but they're average against formations with the quarterback under center. And you wouldn't think about it given Mariota's background as an Oregon quarterback. But Tennessee only goes shotgun 47% of the time, which is 30th in the league. So this would be a good game, perhaps, for Tennessee to take advantage of those under center formations and those sort of standard runs, despite the fact that Baltimore is so strong against the run, and play action from those standard formations rather than going into shotgun and spreading it out all the time.
Right. I'll be surprised if really either of these teams can move the ball very effectively. But like we said before, stranger things have happened. Let's go back to Joe Flacco just for a minute. We kind of joked around before about maybe he's motivated by the threat of Lamar Jackson, but he really has improved from just awful to mediocre this year in a sort of Eli Manning-like way and in a sort of Joe Flacco-like way. It's interesting because I think that Flacco, that was a Freudian slip there. Flacco, 17th in the league in expected points added per attempt, 13th in positive play percentage, 16th in IQR, right mediocre, right in the middle of the league. The Jaguars have been looking for Bortles to have this sort of a season for the past couple of years now and just be this guy who's kind of average and adequate that they can ride to the Super Bowl. And Flacco is starting to look like he can be that again, like he was for the Ravens last time they won the Super Bowl, like Eli Manning was the 2 times that the Giants won the Super Bowl. Flacco really can be this, what the Jaguars want Bortles to be if he's not asked to do too much. I'm still skeptical to see if Bortles can do that, if Tannehill can do that, if these sorts of quarterbacks can live up to that. But I do actually think, well, I'm not the biggest Flacco fan in the world, when he's asked to just kind of be this Andy Dalton level quarterback, I think that you see some positive things.
One other stat that I'll point out, and talking about what Flacco likes to do, Baltimore throws the highest percentage of passes in the league to the middle of the field, mostly to Crabtree and Snead. And Tennessee is 25th in defensive DVOA against passes up the middle. That seems to be their biggest kind of coverage weakness. So could be a good place for Baltimore to take advantage.
Just because you mentioned Willie Snead, I got to tell you, we've got the dad joke of the year email in here at Sports Info Solutions this week. A guy from the UK emailed us in and he said, I'm looking for some on-off stats for the Ravens with Willie Snead on and off the field. Reason is because I was feeding my son some raisins and I kept hearing seedless raisins and started thinking Snead-less Ravens and got curious about the statistics.
People get curious in all sorts of ways.
I love that one. As a big dad joke fan, the Snead-less Ravens, seedless raisins really got me. It was a good one to wake up in the morning to. Anyway, all jokes aside, let's move forward and let's talk about real stuff. The most important game for the Super Bowl. What do we have?
This game is not important for chances of making the playoffs because Kansas City is pretty much in the playoffs at this point. But it's hugely important for the chances of making the Super Bowl. Kansas City at New England Sunday night. Kansas City in our playoff odds makes the Super Bowl 39% of the time if they win this game and 29% if they lose. New England makes the Super Bowl 14% of the time if they win this game, 7% of the time if they lose.
Crazy, crazy big game. It'll obviously remind us all of the first game from the 2017 season. One thing that I'm looking at here is the tight ends. Both these teams have great tight ends. Both these teams are below average at covering opposing tight ends. New England is ceding 22 expected points added per 100 targets. Kansas City, 20 per 100 targets. The league average is down at 16. So that could be a big opportunity for both of these excellent tight ends in this game.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is the Patriots bringing pressure. The Patriots have a much higher pressure rate than anybody I think would ever expect. Now, by the SIS charting, the Patriots are 8th in pressure rate. The ESPN charting actually has them a little higher, but frankly, both of those rankings I think are higher than anybody would expect because one of the typical weaknesses that people talk about with the Patriots is the pass rush, but it hasn't been a weakness this year. But this is where Mahomes' ability to improvise and make plays outside the pocket is so important because he's been really good this year, even when he's pressured. So even though Kansas City allows a lot of pressure, Mahomes has been really good even when pressured. And I'm curious, I don't know whether the SIS numbers would agree with this, but just looking at ESPN's number, the Patriots have allowed a better performance for quarterbacks under duress than they have when quarterbacks are not pressured.
Yeah, we've seen a strange, crazy thing with the Patriots that they've allowed so much, they've generated so much pressure that they've actually had this funny little statistical thing that I'm sure it'll correct itself over time. But this has been the first season that we've really seen that, where in certain occasions we'll look at stats under pressure versus not under pressure, and we'll see some random instances of performances that are better when you would expect them to be worse. Going along with what you're saying about Mahomes, yeah, really good against the pressure. He's 14th in IQR in those situations at 88, but he's great. He's been the best in the NFL, first in the NFL in IQR when not pressured at 134. And to your point, he has yet to face a team with 2 defenders in the top 32 of pressure rate. New England has 3 defenders in the top 10 of pressure rate. Kyle Van Noy is first, Trey Flowers is third, and Adrian Claiborne is 8th. Now those guys get a little bit of a bump because they're not rushing on every play, so their pressure rate is out of how many plays they're actually rushing on, not just being on the field. So you get a little bit of an advantage there kind of beyond your skill because you're not going every time. That said, the rate stats are what they are there, and that'll be a really, really important matchup.
The numbers there against the conventional wisdom. It's sort of conventional wisdom among the Patriots writers that Claiborne hasn't shown this much this year, but the numbers definitely disagree with that.
Looking on the other side, D Ford is the pass rusher to watch out for. He's fourth in the NFL in pressure rate, and he's first in total pressures with 23. So he's coming all the time, and he's getting there too. Looking at some other matchups, I saw some interesting stats on the interwebs this week about Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski and when they've been on the field with Tom Brady, and how much better the Patriots have been in those situations. And just looking at the first 5 games of this year, Gronk's expected points added per target has been split in half from what it was in 2017. He had an outrageous 62 expected points per 100 targets last year. Tom Brady, we see a similar story. 20 expected points per 100 targets last year, down to 8 expected points per 100 targets this year. So looking at the return of Julian Edelman to make a big difference there, along with what we said before about the tight end potentially creating an advantage for Gronk.
I think that the names that really matter in this game for the Patriots are more Sony Michel and James White, because that's where you attack Kansas City's weakness. Dead last in DVOA run defense, dead last in yards per carry allowed, 5.8 yards per carry allowed, and really poor covering running backs in the passing game. They allow, once we adjust these numbers for opponents, they allow a league-high 90 yards a game in running back receptions and rank 28th in DVOA against running backs in the passing game. So that is something the Chiefs have got to solve if they want to win this game. I mean, otherwise they're going to score a ton and they're going to get outscored because the Patriots are just going to run all over them.
I agree with you about Sony Michel. It's common that we think the Patriots historically, as a running back by committee team, they've started to show signs like they do every once in a while of wanting Sony Michel to really be that guy. Saw a 25 carry game, an 18 carry game. He's starting to really get a percentage of touches that we don't often see from Patriots running backs. I think it'll partly be up to him and how well he can keep finding success to see how much that'll continue, rather than kind of go back to the normal Patriots running back by committee.
Right. But for this game, again, I tie back into what we were talking about a few episodes ago, the theory that passing is more dependent on the offense and running on the defense. Because, again, this defense against the run is horrible.
Well, we saw definitely the Patriots tore up the Dolphins on the ground. It'd be interesting to see that again. One more note on this game, just a quick little coverage breakdown to keep an eye on as you're watching. The Patriots have played the most snaps in man coverage this season of any team. Patrick Mahomes struggles against man. His IQR is 20 points lower against man than it is against zone. Other side of the ball, the Chiefs play the second most zone in the NFL this year. We've seen Marcus Peters leave that zone scheme and be a little bit exposed by that. The second most snaps in zone coverage, and Brady has been better against zone than he is against man. So both of those play a little bit into the Patriots' favor. I'll be curious to see if those teams stay with their tendencies. We've got to expect the Patriots, like you said, a lot of blitzing, a lot of man. We've got to expect the Chiefs to stay with what they've been doing in terms of being a patient, bend but don't break zone coverage team. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes with Mahomes going up against that, and if Brady will force the Chiefs to break their convention.
The bend but not break thing is interesting because I actually, for an ESPN article, broke this down, not just looking at the red zone, but just looking at the whole field. Kansas City's side of the field and opponent's side of the field. When opponents are on their own side of the 50, Kansas City is the worst defense in the league by DVOA. When opponents are on Kansas City's side of the 50, it improves to 10th in the NFL. So that's not just past the 20, that's past the 50. They allow a ton of yardage when you're back in your own end. But once you get past the 50, they do stiffen up.
That's really fascinating right there. On that note, we will sign off. Everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy the football, and we will talk to you next week.